More males or females in the world today?
Females.
Okay. Some difference of opinion. If you think there are more males in the world today, can you raise your hand? And if you think there are more females in the world today, can you raise your hand? You're wrong. There are actually more males in the world today. There should be more females. In the U.S. and in Europe, there are actually more females. Given equal opportunity, women live longer, so there would be more females. But in most of the world, there aren't those equal opportunities. And in India, for example, in the first year of life, boys and girls have similar mortality rates because they depend upon the breast, and the breast is pretty much gender blind. From age 1 to 5, girls are 50% more likely to die than boys because they depend on the parents who aren't gender blind. And so it was really that sense that as a result of that, there are between 60 and 100 million women who are missing around the world. And we argue that the central moral challenge in the world today is this kind of gender inequity around the globe. In the 19th century, the challenge was slavery. In the 20th century...
I'm sorry. This is one of the most amazing guys in the world who's talking. He's only going to talk for 10 minutes or less. Would you mind, please, to make sure that all of us can hear him? He's really, really, really great.
This is actually a great example of the whole point of women power, I think. And there's actually a bridge to the larger point that's quite aside from the moral issues of 60 to 100 million women being discriminated against in death. Just as a practical point, if you want to deal with global poverty, then the most effective way to do that is to precisely educate girls, bring them into the labor force. In Afghanistan, one of the metrics that the American generals are using right now to determine whether a given district is going to be safe is the proportion of girls who go to school there. And when you get these hard-hitting generals sitting around talking about girls' education, you get the sense which, one of the ways to build society is not just by dropping bombs, but is precisely by getting more girls in school. And let me give you an example of that. Now, when I was a correspondent in China, I wrote an article about a girl who had to drop out of school for lack of $13 in school fees. And it was a very sad story. Right as kid in school had to drop out. So a lot of readers sent in money. And we got one $10,000 check from a reader to pay for this girl's education. We used that, and it ended up completely transforming this village. They promised that all girls in that school would get an education as long as they could stay in school. Well, unfortunately then, I called up the donor to give a progress report, and I told him, "You're so generous giving $10,000. And he said, "Well, only problem is I didn't actually send $10,000. I sent $100. The bank had made a certain clerical error. They had a little trouble with their decimal point. I'm not really proud of what I did next. I'm not sure this is exactly journalism, but I called up the chief spokesman for the bank, and I explained the problem. And I said how all these girls were now getting their education. And I said, now, on the record, are you planning to dispatch a bunch of bankers out of Hubei province to try to get that money back and force all these girls to drop out of school?" And he said, "Under the circumstances, we're pleased to make a donation of the difference." And it became a great natural experiment of what happens when you invest in girls' education. And as a result, throughout China, you've seen more girls getting educated, obvious improvements in productivity and labor force, but that community has so far outpaced the others, and it's because of one $10,000 investment in girls' education and what that did to the labor force there. And the trick to fighting poverty is to replicate that in a lot of other places around the globe. And now let me introduce Alison Smale, who's going to make this more of a conversation.
So, it's very hard to make ourselves heard and also to see you, but
if you do have questions to Nick, and honestly also urge you to read Half the Sky. It's a terrific book. Does anybody have a question? No? So I'll ask you a question. What was it that made you, besides your experience in China, is it for the sake of your own daughter? Is it for the sake of the many women that you've met in oppressed circumstances? Or is it just in general that you and Cheryl have lighted upon this as the next interesting topic?
I think there were a couple of things. One was that when we lived in China, we were fascinated with the question of why did China succeed? What was the economic formula that made Asia so successful? And there was no one model. South Korea was different from Singapore, it was different from Hong Kong and China. But the common factor across all of East Asian countries that had enjoyed an economic boom was that they took young women and invested in their human capital and then hugely added to the labor force and to the productivity that they got from them. And that was something that seemed to me other countries could learn from. And maybe the other thing was going to Cambodia and seeing human trafficking there and meeting girls who were imprisoned in brothels in their early teens and seeing the real difference in 19th century slavery was that these girls were all going to be dead of AIDS by their 20s. So long after slavery was supposedly abolished, to see this going on a larger scale than slavery that existed in the 1860s was pretty overwhelming.
Thank you. I just wanted to draw your attention, those of you who can hear me, to the fact that we're throwing something in the spotlight on women's issues in the IHT throughout this year. It's a series called The Female Factor. Today was a topic which I hoped would interest people at Davos, which is the experience in Norway of legislating women into the boardroom and what has happened with that. The fact that in Wall Street very few women are at the top of banking, but in India very many women are, which I think shows us that we can learn from all around the world and that we really should be as diverse as we all pledge to be every time we come here to Davos. For those of you who are listening, I thank you very much. I especially thank Nick for coming all the way from Eastern Congo to be here with us tonight. Really thank you.